Oh hey, has your cute kitchen become a cluttered mess and now you feel like you're emotionally drowning? Well, lucky for you, I have some tips to get your kitchen and your life back in order. Ma'am, we do need to do a video right now. At least face the camera. Okay. This is Laugh Cry DIY. I am your host, Katie, and on this channel, we share DIYs and decor tips to help make your house cuter. But as we know, if you are someone who lives in a small space, be it a small home, apartment, studio, with a small kitchen, it is easy for life to turn to chaos because there are so many things you need to store, and oftentimes kitchens are too small to store the things you need to store. And because I just did a video on renter-friendly hacks to decorate your kitchen, which I will link below if you haven't seen it, I also wanted to share my tips to maximize storage in a kitchen in cute, clever, and even unexpected ways. And while I am going to talk about several solutions today, we should start by talking about the most crucial thing in a kitchen, and that is utilizing vertical space as much as possible. Getting things up on walls, up on top of cabinets, using dead zones that you don't realize are dead zones. So many of these tips are going to be about getting things up and out of your life. So let's go ahead and get our lives in order, starting with kitchen rails. Kitchen rails are such a cool, kind of glamorous, kind of old school way to hang things, and I really like them for a few reasons. Rails are great to hang anything within easy reach. Obviously, pots are one of the most common things to hang. Here you can see they've hung them right across the window, which is an often underused space, but I think they're great because you can really hang them just about anywhere. Like, I love how they did this right behind the range. You can even use them to hang plants. Here you can see they've hung them very high up. Here they ran one under the shelves to hang mugs, whisks, scissors, functional tools like that. And I will say I am a big fan of brass rails or other metallics, just because I think it introduces a nice material. But you can do metallics, you can do wood rails. I've even seen like leather used. But no matter what material you use, they're just such a great way to use dead zones, especially even a small one tucked in between two cabinets, hanging a few items. It can just make your life a lot easier, and I think it looks cute. So that's why I ride for rails. And while we're talking about functionality, I like when you can combine storage and aesthetics and convenience all in one. And that's why I also think that pegboards are a really great thing to use in your kitchen. These are very versatile, you can customize them. This is a beautiful example here of how they have used it to hang multiple items. We've got the pots, we've got spoons, we have little jars. Here's another great example. I love how they even included a little space for the plant, and depending on the way you design it, it can make things so much easier if you're putting all your most frequently used items on it. And of course, I am a big maximalist color pattern girl, so I do also love the way that a pegboard can be used to introduce color, especially if you're a renter and you can't paint or you don't want to paint. I absolutely love this example with this nice cheery pop of yellow, including the shelf above. It doesn't feel like an eyesore, it feels like a real add to the space. And what's great about pegboard is that it is so budget friendly. You can obviously order whatever sizes you want, or you can just go to the hardware store. You can get an 8x4 piece of pegboard for like 25 bucks. You can paint it, cut it up, put multiple pieces, multiple places in your kitchen, and there are also just so many accessories you can add to it to make it as functional as possible for you, whether that's hooks, shelves, magnets, things like that. So on this channel, we are very, very pro pegboard. Of course, if hanging things on the walls feels like too much work to do or too much of a project, then if you have floor space, it is also very smart to do standing shelving. And this can take many forms. Of course, you can buy freestanding storage to stack things on. I do like this style where it's on wheels. If you need to move things around, that can be a very flexible, helpful piece of furniture. You can also get more of a baker's rack style where you have a lot of different cubbies for different things, whether that's appliances or a little coffee station or baking supplies. You can also tuck in something like a hutch, which honestly these days is pretty easy to thrift or get off Facebook Marketplace, and that can provide a lot of extra storage. And of course, it all depends on the dimensions of your space, but even doing a really small, thin standing rack can totally work. Hot tip, when you're searching for those, look for bathroom standing racks, such as this IKEA one. This is only 13 inches wide, but as you can see, that could tuck in anywhere. You could also customize it, so that's a really great option. Another unexpected thing you can use is actually a standing ladder rack. This can also be great and really functional. There are a lot of options out there, so you can get whatever style fits your aesthetic. Obviously, those are really convenient to store pots, and because pots are some of the more like clunky and inconvenient things to store, if you are somebody who either has a large collection or cooks quite often and has a little bit of extra floor space, doing a standing pot rack might also be a really good choice. They make plenty of different versions, and if you are someone who is a cookware collector or has a very aesthetic collection, this can be a really nice way to display that. Of course, I know not everybody has the room to have a full standing rack of some sort, in which case you do just need shelves that are on the wall or out of the way. And of course, there's a million styles you could get, but I want to run through some of my favorites to maximize space in cute and clever ways. First, I love any sort of wall-mounted situation that is multi-use. I love this one, for example, because it also features a little desk area that is very smart to either increase your own counter space or create a multifunctional space. I also like wall-mounted shelves that have a kind of built-in rail. That is helpful to both store things and make sure they don't fall off if you live in an earthquake-prone area. Here's another example of that. I do love that they used these all for cookbook storage. I think it's a great way to display them. I also love shelving that is multifunctional. For example, this little unit on the wall here, you have open shelving on top, you have those little pull-out drawers, and then you have the hooks for mugs underneath. That's a clever way to store multiple items in one piece. I really love these hanging shelves that you can hang off either a refrigerator or even the side of a cabinet. These come in a few different versions. They're very smart, they're very functional, and I love that they're petite, so they don't feel that intrusive. And I will say that these sides of cabinets can be a very underused dead space, but you can use them in such clever ways. For example, I love this hanging rack to store cutting boards. It is so smart and so clever. On that note, if you have metallic or plastic file folders, you can easily mount those on the side of cabinets, tuck them in anywhere, and it just creates an extra little pocket for storage. That's a great hack. I also love that shelves can be a decor item if you want something that is both functional and super cute. For example, I love these colorful shelves here. They're really simple, but they add a nice little pop of color. I also love that they are open storage, so you can store things that you need to grab, as well as decorative items like that cute little lamp and vase. I'm also a big fan of small shelving units to display mugs. Those are always cute. They can add a little fun personality to the kitchen. And I've said it before on the channel, I'll say it again, I'll say it a million more times. You don't need large shelves on the wall either. Tiny, tiny little shelves, like little spice racks, little wall-mounted organizers, tiny little hanging shelves. They're not very intrusive, but they can be so convenient to get stuff up and out. Of course, if the idea of hanging any shelving feels overwhelming because you don't know how to get it level or keep it in or whatever, there are also other very easy lazy girl ways to increase storage, which is why we should talk about accordion racks. These types of racks are usually used in hallways or closets, but they can be very, very functional in the kitchen. And you can also thrift them. They are super helpful for mug storage. I think this is such a clever way to do it if you don't have full shelving. Here's another example of how they did that in a little coffee station area. And even a small one can be really helpful. I love how they tucked this underneath a shelf. Use it to hang your shopping bags, to hang tools. Here's another brilliant example of how they even used it to store a teapot. I think that is so clever and so unexpected. Now, obviously we've been talking about a lot of vertical storage solutions, but I know that not everybody has wall space. And sometimes what you really need is more counter space. In which case, depending on the size of your kitchen, you may benefit from a small, tiny kitchen island. Of course, often when we think about kitchen islands, we think of like giant marble slabs in the middle of a massive kitchen, but a smaller piece of furniture can still be very helpful. This kitchen island is a cute IKEA DIY. They just added a top to the calyx shelving units. I think this is great for both the counter space as well as the storage below. Here's another example of that type of unit. I really like the little towel bar on the side. Again, it's those little details that make things more functional. This is a small rolling unit, which again, being on wheels is super helpful to move this around for different tasks. And when I tell you they don't need to be that big, here is a perfect example. This is basically a tiny hallway console table that they just tucked into the kitchen area. It's very narrow, so it's not that intrusive, but it still adds extra function. Also, I feel like when people think of islands, they think that it needs to sit as a standalone in the middle of a kitchen, but sometimes the way you position it can actually help you define the space. Like, here's a great example of how they used that same IKEA calyx to create a little island, but they floated it out to create more definition between the kitchen and the living room. And I like that these examples are also customizable. If you want to paint it a different color or use contact paper, you can do closed storage, you can do open storage, you can create a little colorful patterned skirt that goes all around it. So it's very customizable to your style while still providing that function. How many times am I gonna say function in this video? Should we count it? Now, obviously islands are a very common thing to see in a kitchen, but I think we should also talk about unexpected, clever storage in the form of other unconventional furniture pieces. For example, desks can be a great add. Here's one of my favorite examples of how they added this tiny desk with these two cute little stools tucked in. It's unexpected because you'd assume they would add a dining table, but because it has the little drawers, it adds that much more storage in a clever way. Here's another example of a little desk. This one has the pull-out drawer as well as the cubbies, so again, just that much more storage. Banquette seating can also be really smart, especially if that is pull-up or pull-out storage. Here's another interesting example where they actually added a dresser. Obviously, it was tiny enough to fit the width, but I think that one's really clever. So obviously a lot of creative options, but again, I guess I would just say don't limit yourself to what you think is like supposed to be in your kitchen. Now let's move on from the heavier duty things back to some lighter, easier, simple, lazy girl options. And this one is for my cottagecore girlies who fantasize about living in a country kitchen, but that is simply baskets. Baskets are great for a few reasons. I like that they add texture. They are readily available. You can always thrift some. They are a great option if you don't have drawers or covered storage and you want to make things look a little bit more neat. And they're also just very useful and functional for kitchen things like fruit. I love these hanging baskets with the dish towels in them. They're out of the way, they're easy to reach, and they add some character. Also, like I mentioned, the side of cabinets is super good for storage. Here's a great example of using baskets in that way. I think this is very charming. It makes your kitchen feel a little bit more like a country store, and I really like that. Of course, hanging baskets are always a classic. You can also hang them from the ceiling or down underneath a cabinet or shelf like this, which I think is really smart. And I will say, going back to this island picture, you will notice how they stacked all the baskets on top of the cabinets. This is a great option if your cabinets don't go all the way up and you want some neater closed storage. So when you're looking for storage solutions, baskets, baby, baskets. Now, if baskets feels too obvious to you, totally get it. Let's talk about something that is very underused that probably more people can take advantage of, and that is magnetic storage, specifically on the side of your fridge. I know we talked about hanging units off the side of a fridge, but these magnetic shelves are also very clever and can also be used for multifunctional storage. Here's another kind of magnetic spice rack version. Obviously, you can use these for anything, and obviously magnetic knife racks are very popular, but I also like the strip of peg hooks below that make it really easy to grab those pot holders. And there are many versions of these, whether you want straight shelves or hooks or things like that. So it really just depends on your needs, but side of the fridge, get into it. And that brings us to our last tip of the day, which I'm gonna call under cabinet storage. By which I mean using the space under cabinets or shelves that is often also a dead zone, but can be used in very clever ways. For example, I love this little fruit basket. It is very helpful to get stuff up and off of the counters. Again, kitchen rails are really great under cabinet storage for hanging hooks. This type of under cabinet basket where it slides onto the shelf is really helpful, especially for interior cabinet organizing. Under cabinet paper towel holders are very popular. Of course, that's a great way to store wine glasses. They even make these hooks that slide right on so you don't have to mount the glass rack underneath. You can even use those to store supplies like foil or cling wrap. So there are a lot of ways to use that dead space. I would also say, considering inside cabinet doors, you can get hanging organizers. You can use the inside to store things like teaspoons or stuff like that. So again, I think if you are looking to reorganize your kitchen in a cool and clever and convenient way, I think the smartest thing to do is to look at your kitchen and point out every little dead zone that you do not use and do not notice, because that is definitely going to help you create a better storage solution. So with that said, I hope your kitchen becomes a cute, clean oasis that brings you joy. If you're looking for more decor tip videos, I will link my playlist below. I always like to share convenient, realistic, budget-friendly ideas for your space, no matter what your style is. For the record, I will have more makeovers coming up on the channel, so stay tuned for those. And in the meantime, I guess I'll go do my dishes. You wanna do dishes with me? Okay, bye.